This episode of Tales from Atlantis is brought to you by Atlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromatlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so, and why that's so, and why that's so.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Atlantis. We are your hosts, Curly Tlapoyawa
and Ruben Ariano Tlacatecat.
What is going on, Dr. Ariano?
Well, we have a guest today, Dr. Luis Herrán Ávila from the UNM.
Doctor,
excited to see you. Been a long time.
Yeah. You're a return guest. You're our first return guest for season 4. And for those who don't know Dr. Herrán Ávila, he is an assistant professor in the Department of History at UNM. He is a historian of the Cold War in Latin America with an emphasis on conservative, anti-communist, and extreme right movements. So welcome, Dr. Herrán Ávila. And it sounds like it's apropos to the times, which you're an expert on, because it's going down.
It's election season in Mexico, right?
Yeah. So how are you doing?
Good. Well, thank you guys for having me on the show again. It's an honor and a pleasure. And yeah, let's talk Mexican right-wing politics. That's what I'm here for.
So next month is... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it all Mexican politics right wing?
Well, we're gonna talk about that. Next month is the presidential election, right? And we've got who is it? Xochitl. What is her last name?
No, but does she pronounce it Xochitl or just Xochitl
or Suchil?
Xochitl. Yeah,
right.
She does the let's say the standard Mexican pronunciation. Xochitl Galvez.
Xochitl. That's right.
So we have Xochitl Galvez, and then who's the opponent?
Claudia Sheinbaum. That is the Morena candidate. And then we have a third guy who nobody knows, whose name I'm actually blanking on. Jesus.
That's how unknown this guy is.
Yeah,
the odds do not look good.
No, this is the candidate from this third party called Movimiento Ciudadano, which is kind of this, I guess, middle of the road.
What's the John Smith equivalent in Mexico? Is it Juan
Perez?
Juan Perez. There you go.
Right. Yeah, we can just call him Juan Perez.
Just call him Juan Perez.
His name is Jorge Alvarez Maynez. Young guy.
What's the last name? Maynez?
Maynez.
Maynez?
How do you spell that?
It's Maynez.
Maynez.
Very kind of strange last name.
That is odd. I don't think I've ever encountered that last name.
Yeah. So those are your three candidates.
So back to Xochitl. What party does she represent? So Claudia represents Morena, then...
Claudia is with Morena, and I mean, there's a coalition of parties along with Morena, with the PT, the Labor Party, and the Green Party, which has nothing to do with anything green. It's just the name.
Do they wear green? Is that what they call them?
They wear green, and it's they. I mean, originally they were kind of an environmentalist party, but they're just a bunch of crooks at this point.
Now the green is the money.
Green is the money. Except in Mexico.
Except in Mexico, it's not green.
But then again, Mexico does take a lot of dollars. So
yeah, that's true. So that's Claudia Sheinbaum's coalition with Morena, and then Xochitl Galvez is representing another coalition. Which is the strangest one so far, ever in Mexican history. It's the PRD, which used to be the leftist party, right, for a long time, since its origins in the 1980s. So it's the PRD, the PRI, the party that refuses to die.
You mean like Republicans?
Yeah, very much. And then the PAN, right? The PAN.
Wow.
Which traditionally has been the kind of center-right party. So you have this weird coalition of parties that are, just basically their shared identities. We oppose Morena.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that you have a coalition of the sore losers versus the coalition of the up and comers.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Wow.
And that sounds like Mexican politics for the past couple hundred years.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what's interesting is that, I guess, in past elections, I don't know, in the past, let's say 30 years, you've had like clearer lines, right, between left and right.
Well, especially again, like between the PRD and the PRI, right? Like those guys were the traditional adversaries.
Totally. Since the 1980s, I mean, since the 1988 election between Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, right? This is before the PRD was formed. But you had Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, the son of Lázaro Cárdenas, competing against Carlos Salinas, right? Your neoliberal PRI sort of candidate. That was kind of the founding moment of this decades-long rivalry, and now they're together in this coalition, and it's really strange for a lot of people to just see how tables have turned.
So, for the listeners who aren't familiar with Mexican politics, can you unpack some of these terms like PRI, PRD, PAN, and
Morena?
Right? Just give us like a brief summary of each.
Yes, of course. So we have let's start with the PRI, which is perhaps the most important party of the whole 20th century in Mexico, right? That party of the institutionalized revolution that had different incarnations throughout the 20th century. Basically a party that emerged out of the Mexican Revolution of the 1910s, and that all throughout the 20th century based its legitimacy in saying we are the party of the revolution. The revolution continues, right? And this was the rhetoric that they used up until, let's say, the 1990s, right? They are what we can call kind of a chameleon party, in the sense that they've had kind of a leftist face, but also a very right-wing face, very repressive and authoritarian, and then also playing kind of, we are the center, we are the balance, we can keep stable politics while also delivering the goods for the Mexican population. No? So that's a PRI. They lost the Mexican presidency in the year 2000, and that brought their 71-year dominance to an end. Then we have the PAN, which is the oldest opposition party to the PRI. Right? They were founded in 1939. It was founded essentially by the Catholic opposition to the PRI. Right? So traditionally, a center-right, if not very right.
Yeah, I was going to say those guys.
Party. Yeah, originally they were.
A lot of them came out.
At least a few of them.
The gold shirts, right? Didn't some of the gold shirts eventually?
No, the gold shirts never really. Let's say they were never really into the politics of the PAN.
That's right.
Some of the founders of the PAN were Franco sympathizers, right? Sympathizers of the Franco dictatorship in Spain. Some were sympathizers of Nazi Germany, but that kind of faded away sort of fairly quickly after the end of World War II. And they were more like we're a Catholic sort of Christian democratic party, right? And they've been around for, again, a while. And they are actually the main party behind Xochitl Gálvez's candidacy. Also, although it's a coalition, they are actually the strongest of the three parties in the coalition, which makes, again, her candidacy a little bit suspicious, at least for us who study the right. Like, what is the real agenda here, right? What are the real policies that, were she to win the election, what is she going to implement?
Well, what is she known for? Like, what were her views prior to running for president?
She's been part of the PAN, at least as I believe as a legislator and a senator, although not officially a member of the party. And she's been known to be kind of a center, wishy-washy politician. She is somewhat what we can call progressive in terms of things like women's reproductive rights. She's kind of very open about that. She, and we can talk more about this if you want, she claims an indigenous identity as well, which is something that's not that common for mainstream politicians. But then again, a lot of the platform that she's been promoting has been manufactured for her mostly by the PAN. Right, by this center-right party. So it's kind of constrained her ability to appear more progressive, which is
the way you describe her, she kind of reminds me of George W. Bush. He was kind of one of those figures that, yeah, he belonged to the Republican Party, but he tended to be a little bit more kind of progressive on social issues. He was pro-immigration when he was governor of Texas, and because Texas at the time tended to be a little bit more diverse in its political direction than it currently is. And so it kind of reminds me a lot of like his politics. Once he became the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party, he basically just fell in line and followed the directive of the National Party. And it sounds like that's what she's doing now, right? She has her own personal politics that she subscribed to over the years, but now that she's like the presumptive nominee for the coalition, now she kind of has to abide by, at least by the terms that the leading partner in that coalition has set out for her, right?
Exactly. And that's something that, is constraining her ability to appear a little bit more progressive. And that's just, that's a problem for her because, we can talk about Morena in a second, about all the problems with Morena, but progressive rhetoric or progressive discourse is actually what's in vogue in Mexico, right? So you have to appeal to things like social reform or social welfare, benefits for, the poorest population, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, you're not going to get any votes, right? So that's been a problem for her, that she has this center-right party as the dominant party behind her coalition, and sometimes she can't really speak her mind about certain issues. And lastly, Morena, which is perhaps the most interesting of the current mainstream parties. It's a party of course, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, a party that's the newest of all the parties that are in the race, mostly made up of former PRD folks, right? So people who were on the left, kind of the historical left, including some kind of socialists and communists and all that, who were in the PRD, who were, again, social reformists, social democrats, so on and so forth, that left the PRD to create this new party, basically a party that was formed around the leadership of López Obrador, right? So it's a party that's very much centered on his leadership. And then, like the PRI in the past, Morena has been able to attract and even, we can say, capture politicians from all other parties, like the PAN, like the PRI, who suddenly have this, like, they see the light and they decide, oh, maybe it's better for the nation if I, instead of being in the PRI or the PAN or the PRD, I just join Morena, which is the party that's winning everything and has been winning governorships, the party that currently dominates both the Senate and the House or the Congress, right, in Mexico. So it's become this dominant party, right?
And how old is Morena?
It was created after the 2012 election, right? López Obrador was a candidate back then, and he just broke with it. So he parted ways with the PRD. There was kind of a split in the party. He said, I'm going to just create my own party. I can't work with these people anymore. So he, again, created this party, Morena, as a almost as a personal project, right? So it's no longer, the ideology, and this is something that people have studied in Mexico or are studying currently, is that their ideology is Obradorism.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads me to my next question. I wonder if, not in terms of their politics, but it sounds very similar to like the MAGA movement here that is behind Trump. Like, does it survive AMLO, the party, Morena? For instance, there's a lot of speculation here in the U.S. in terms of whether or not the MAGA Republicans or even the Republican Party itself will survive Trump. So is there kind of like a similar conversation going on in Mexico in terms of AMLO and Morena?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of The Four Disagreements? Just visit talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I think that is the big question, that, López Obrador is not going to live forever. His leadership is so strong in the party that once he's gone, what's going to happen, right? Even if they stay in power for several years, who's going to take that stuff? No? So I think it's a very similar question. So that's, I think, the challenge. Claudia Sheinbaum, the Morena candidate, is going to most likely going to win the election. That's going to be the challenge: is how do we manage a transition within the party, right? So that it's not so personalized. And so that maybe, I mean, that's something that a lot of people are maybe kind of hopeful for, is that maybe there will be a change and have let's say, a progressive movement / party less attached to this, figure, and more about the actual platform and the policies and so on and so forth. No.
Well, historically, how has populism done in Mexico?
Well, that's the thing, is that, aside from, I think the last political figure to have that status was precisely Lázaro Cárdenas, right, in the 1930s. That became so iconic that a lot of his political traction was based on that charisma and, the idea of land reform, the legacy of the oil nationalization in 1938, etc., right? But then from after Cárdenas, it was really the party, the PRI. It was not about the personality or the charisma of the sitting president. It was more about the political apparatus and machinery that the PRI had built, right? So we have, terrible presidents in the sense of, zero charisma, like completely, right? I don't know. Think about the guy who was president in 1968 when the student massacre happened, right? Gustavo Díaz Ordaz. He had zero charisma. In zero popular appeal. He was, an authoritarian, sort of very dry, almost, I would say, the most right-wing president that the PRI has had. But, the PRI had a little bit of everything. So, but it was never focused on really the president's personality. So with López Obrador, that is one of the big, I guess, novelties, is that this is a figure that's become so dominant and so popular that we're wondering about what's going to be the kind of the effect of that, let's say, in the next 20 years.
Right. And so I'm wondering, last time you were here, we talked about some right-wing movements in Mexico. We talked about the Tecos and how they're connected to, is it the Universidad de Guanajuato? Or
Guadalajara. La Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara. Right.
And we talked about how there was maybe like a loose connection, or maybe I'm misremembering, but there was like a connection between Ordaz and sort of what was going on with them, because they're kind of the same approach to things, right? My way or the highway, kind of. Maybe not the politics themselves, right? So can you point to any similarity between what was happening in 68 to something that might be happening currently in the current political theater in Mexico?
Well, I think one thing that is similar, I would say, is that the Mexican left, however you define that, is kind of, shifting again. And that's something that happened during the 1960s and certainly after 68, right? When state repression was sort of a signal that the more conventional forms of dissidence were no longer possible. And that led to the radicalization of a considerable sector of the left, particularly young people, right, that joined guerrilla groups or that simply became more radicalized. Not saying, of course, that that's happening now, but what I'm saying is that today, what we're seeing is that the left has been reconfigured in such a dramatic way that seems to be inside of Morena, right? Which means they are sort of part of the government and part of the system, if you want. So it's a big question for those leftists who don't share Morena's program, or the fact that Morena has become the kind of the dominant party. What do you do as a leftist who is not an obradorista?
Right, because with everything, it falls in the spectrum, right? So I'm not sure where Morena would fall in the spectrum, but I'm sure that people who are more on the radical left side of things probably have a lot of criticism against Morena and Obrador, which, maybe you can say a few words about that and see how we can tie that into the opposing view on the right as well.
Yes, of course. For instance, one important voice from the left that has been opposing Morena has been the Zapatistas, right, who are still around they have been, I would say, marginalized by the media and by the political system, because when López Obrador became president, they were immediately very critical, of different things, but particularly saying, look, we historically belong to the same side, but we're going to keep pointing out the failures of the political system. We're going to keep being part of the opposition, right? So Morena didn't like that, and essentially, sidelined the Zapatistas. And that's one sector of the, radical left that sort of remains critical, but has also been pretty much silenced. No? And there are other groups. Think about for instance, feminist groups and organizations who have also clashed with López Obrador, particularly over the question of femicide in Mexico, basically saying, look, you're not doing enough. It's still happening. We still have all of these issues with sexism and macho violence, etc. So López Obrador has accused them of being conservatives, of being allies of the right. And of course, feminist groups haven't taken that, with a lot of sympathy, right? So, those are two examples of sectors of the left that have been that remain critical and that seem to have no space in Morena, at least as in terms of party structure, right? Morena still claims to be a feminist party. And we'll see how that might change with Claudia Sheinbaum.
Is she not very feminist, according to the feminists Mexico, or?
I guess in her personal trajectory, you could say she's, a good example of, she's a scientist, she's an academic, she's been in politics for a while. So in terms of her life trajectory, she's outspoken about women's reproductive rights, equality, so on and so forth. The problem that she has had is that because she was the mayor of Mexico City, and during her term as mayor, there were a lot of clashes between the police and these feminist protests. So feminist groups have said, look, you can claim all you want, the banner of feminism, but you've thrown your police to repress our protests, right? So that's not very feminist of you.
The proof is in the pudding.
Right. So so it's a very interesting kind of dynamic, right? Where Morena accuses the radical left of being allies with the right, just a little weird. But then the radical left is also saying, look, Morena is actually a conservative party.
Right. I mean, that's always the case, right? I mean, again, we go back to the spectrum. The further you are to the middle, the more conservative you look on the left, and on the right, the more radical you look more on the left. So it's one of those conundrums.
Well, speaking of the right, I want to talk about this guy, Eduardo Verástegui. Am I saying his name right? And I guess he was this former telenovela star, an actor, a model, a good-looking guy, right? I don't know if he's very charismatic, but I mean, he did come out in Paul Blart Mall Cop 2, I'm seeing on his...
Who was he?
I don't know.
Because I've seen both. I binge watching both of those movies.
He played a character named Eduardo.
Okay.
Oh, no, he didn't. That's what he's credited as. No. Yeah, he played a guy named Eduardo. He was also in the Cristiada movie, For Greater Glory, which makes sense. And apparently, the morning after Mexico's Supreme Court decriminalized abortion, which was a huge move on their part, this inspired him to really get into right-wing politics even more. And that's when he registered as an independent candidate for the 2024 presidential campaign. And I don't know if anybody thinks he was serious about becoming president, or if he was just looking to get notoriety, like, oh, look, this former TV star and actor is now running for president, and he's promoting the far right. He's super against women's reproductive rights, right?
It sounds to me like he's taking cues from the big orange blowhard.
Yeah, right? It's kind of, there are some similarities there for sure. I know he said that he thinks abortion is murder, like it's straight up murder, and that any doctor who performs an abortion should be imprisoned for a minimum of 100 years. And then he said, we are a Catholic country governed by an anti-Catholic government, which It makes sense he would be in the Cristiada movie for sure with an attitude like that. So what do we know about this guy, Eduardo Verástegui?
Well, aside from, as you said, being a telenovela actor, a terrible one, and also a terrible, movie actor.
He was in Paul Blart Mall Cop 2, bro. That he can't.
I need to go back and check to see which character he played on that.
Aside from that, he's had this interesting. He's an interesting figure because he's a kind of a link between Mexican right-wing politics and U.S. American right-wing politics. Right? He did play an interesting role in the Trump campaign. He was, I think, I can't remember his exact title, but he was something like an advisor to Trump on Latino issues or Latino politics, something like that. He was kind of photographed alongside Trump several times. He attended different events, particularly with Latino kind of Republican constituents and so on and so forth. So, and he was also, I think I might be wrong about this, but I think he was part of the production group of this film that I'm blanking on the title, this film about human trafficking.
Sound of Freedom?
Yes, Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
He was one of the biggest promoters of the film, but also I think he was part of he was a producer, I believe. Right?
Yeah, his company produced the film. Well, it was one of the producers of the film, and his company has it's a name in Latin, and it's like a Catholic term for repentance. And I can't remember the Latin word, but that's what he named his company is Latin for repentance.
So it gives you a sense, it gives you kind of an idea of how this guy is operating on both stages, right? Both in the US and in Mexico. I would say that he's been more successful in the United States in the sense that, he's attached himself to the MAGA movement, into this, we can call it this alliance between evangelicals and conservative Catholics that have been promoting things like this film, no? And all the conspiracy theories that you can think about, like about vaccines or about gender ideology or the dangers of feminism. Joe Biden is a communist, stuff like that. Right?
He's the most milquetoast communist on the planet, if he is. So I looked it up. He was a member of the President's Advisory Commission on Hispanic Prosperity. So I didn't know that foreign nationals could become members of advisory commissions.
He has U.S. citizenship.
He does. Interesting.
Was he born in the U.S. and has dual citizenship?
He was born in Mexico, but he has dual citizenship.
He applied for citizenship. Got it.
Yeah, and that's been also part of one minor part of what people have been pointing out about him is that, well, this guy has been making a political career in the United States and now suddenly wants to become president in Mexico. Like, how would that work? And Mexican politics is very kind of wary of this stuff about foreign intervention.
Of gringos especially.
Yeah.
Well, he founded CPAC Mexico, right? Like he was behind.
He was the founder of CPAC Mexico, right? So the conference, conservative political action conference, that maybe I'm getting the acronym wrong.
What's it called in Mexico in Spanish?
Just CPAC Mexico. CPAC Mexico.
Oh, they didn't even bother to translate
No.
Okay.
No. And the thing is that CPAC is it's of course originally a U.S. American group, right, that emerges out of the 1970s, but it's been kind of expanding its influence and operations to other parts of the world, like Hungary, right, where Trump and the conservative movement in the U.S. have like a lot of really good allies, including the actual government of Hungary. They also have had conferences, meetings in Brazil. I think there's been at least 2 or 3 meetings in Brazil. And then that one that they held in Mexico that was, again, sponsored by Verástegui and a whole bunch of people that are sympathizers with his right-wing politics. So, that was perhaps one of the most visible public stages where Verástegui launched his presidential campaign. right?
Mm-hmm.
He invited the son of Jair Bolsonaro.
Yeah,
Eduardo Bolsonaro was quite a character.
So was
Right?
Eduardo and Eduardo?
Right, exactly.
Man, what's up with guys named Eduardo? What the hell's going on here?
And that's what he basically said. I am going to run for president, and I mean, just wait for 2024. And people, I mean, I followed the broadcast of the event, and at least the audience seemed very thrilled about the idea, right? But it really, the candidacy really just fell apart, partly because the Mexican political system doesn't really allow much space for independent candidates,
Mm-hmm.
or like citizen candidates. He didn't really have a political party backing him. And he just fell short of the number of signatures that he needed. So, I mean, it was kind of an interesting moment, because it just shows you that, yes, him and his supporters might be noisy in terms of, social media and all that stuff, but they just don't have the numbers.
So his candidacy fell apart. So he's no longer in the running.
He's no longer in the running.
So right now it's basically between Sheinbaum
race
and what's Xochitl's last name again? Galvez. And who's the third one?
And exactly.
And let's just call him
Juan Perez. Can we say Juan Perez?
Juan Perez. Well, I pulled up the story here from Reuters about CPAC Mexico, and it's just funny how similar all of this sounds. It's like beating the same old drum again. It said Matt Schlapp, that's his real name, by the way. Matt Schlapp, chairman of CPAC parent group American Conservative Union, said in the opening remarks at CPAC Mexico that his biggest worry was the march of godless communism from Latin America to the United States.
It says Chairman Schlapp. I prefer Chairman Mao over Chairman Schlapp. It has a better kind of flow to it, Chairman Mao. I'm not a communist, by the way. I'm just saying, for the record. But it sounds to me like this is an international conspiracy, wouldn't you say? I mean,
sounds like it.
Going to Brazil, going to Hungary, their ankles are in Mexico, and
they also held a meeting, a CPAC meeting in surprise, Israel.
Oh wow!
Oh, surprise! Yeah.
Well, this story goes on to say speakers who included conspiracy theorists, activists, and media personalities from around the world called for new leaders to fight the spread of socialism, globalism, and woke culture in Mexico and elsewhere in the region. And then here we go. Eduardo Verástegui. The right, the true right, has been orphaned, said Eduardo Verástegui, a Mexican soap actor turned anti-abortion advocate who helped organize the conference and who Eduardo Bolsonaro praised as the future president of Mexico.
Wow. That's some bold claims there.
So this idea that the true right has been orphaned, like what's that based on? What is he what is the true right that he's referring to?
Well, that is the interesting question. No, at least in the Mexican context, and if you think about Verástegui as kind of the part of this right-wing conservative Catholicism in Mexico, the true right is the hardcore religious right, not the PAN, certainly not the PRI. They don't like this kind of moderation thing, the lukewarm sort of, we're conservative, but we're willing to negotiate certain things.
So he's a Christo-fascist, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, there is, I think, a seed of that, right? And this has to do with we spoke about this, I think, the last time I was in your show, that, the legacy of the Cristero War, right? Verástegui is someone who sees himself as kind of a continuator, right, of that tradition and of that struggle, right? And this is something that came up several times during that CPAC Mexico meeting, whereas, speakers, Mexican speakers, talking about, we are Cristeros. We just don't fight. We just don't fight with rifles anymore. There are other forms of struggle, but we should continue. We should carry on that same spirit of combat. No? So that is a political ideology, right? That we can. I think it's safe to say that there's an element of Christo-fascism
So
or
why didn't
Christian
he,
nationalism.
what, instead of running as an independent, why didn't he just go ahead and reinstall the Cristiada party in Mexico? I mean, is it because there isn't a lot of support for something that is so overtly religiously labeled, or what's the hesitation? I mean, because yeah, Mexico, it tends to be a progressive liberal country in general, but it's still very Catholic and very religious.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the what maybe from the outside looks like a weird like something that's hard to reconcile. No,
Hmm.
I always say that in a country that's 90+% Catholic, um, a candidate like him wouldn't really, his candidacy never really took off. Partly it has to do with again the lack of support from a mainstream party, right? Um, and but also this very interesting feature of Mexican political culture, where yes, you can be a majority Catholic country, but there is, I think, still a very strong sense that politics and religion don't belong in the same realm. Like they
So
must be separate. Right?
there's a stricter sense of separation of church and state in Mexico than there is in this country among the general populace.
At least that's my sense, and I might be biased because that's how I see things, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, for instance, in Morena or even in the PRD, right, which was that leftist party. I mean, you have, let's say, people with leftist politics, but also being very, I don't know, very attached to the traditions of Mexican Catholicism, like the Virgin of Guadalupe, right? Like they see no contradiction between being a sort of a Marxist or a socialist or what have you, and then being also Catholic, right? They kind of understand that separation. And at least from what I've seen, let's say, if you look sometimes at things like opinion polls and stuff like that, people seem to have, again, that same idea, right? That yes, Catholicism is an important part of my life, but I'm not about to vote for, someone that's essentially advocating for the imposition of, right, a Christian politics over the entire country. But that's just not, right? And this has to do with education or stuff about women's rights or just the role of the church in government and stuff like that. Also, I mean, you can call this the victory of Benito Juarez and the 19th century liberalism, right? They are probably very happy in their graves, not rolling on their graves, but actually very happy celebrating that these principles of Mexican liberalism still hold somewhat strong.
So the last time you were here, we spoke a little bit about El Yunque.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is in the past year or so, I've been seeing their name pop up more on social media. Mm-hmm. And there's this idea that El Yunque, even though politicians in Mexico, like some of them, they claim that El Yunque doesn't exist, right? They're like, oh, that's a boogeyman. That doesn't exist. I'm not a member of El Yunque. And but on the other side, I'm seeing all these stories about how the PAN in particular, and then there's a neo-fascist party in Spain called Vox, VOX, that both of those parties are being actively, if not infiltrated, at least influenced by the modern iteration of El Yunque. And there was a reporter, I can't remember his name, but he claims that he came across like a cache of internal documents from El Yunque, and that he's able to show that there is an effort, a strategy on the part of El Yunque to actively try to continue infiltrating and influencing Mexican politics. Do you see, I mean, is there any truth to that? And to what level would they even have influence on what's going on right now?
Right. Yeah, I mean, El Yunque it's one of those organizations that's very difficult to, to research and to really have a clear understanding, just because it's an organization that operates basically as a clandestine or a group, right? A secret group. Secrecy is, their most important value, no? And people that write about them sometimes tend to exaggerate their influence. But it is true that part, I've seen documents, Yunque documents at the National Archive in Mexico. It is true that their main strategy is, yes, remain secret and then infiltrate, and they use this language, right? The language of infiltration of government and civil society in general, business groups, church groups, education, so on and so forth, right? Kind of placing members of El Yunque in important posts, right, in key posts, so that they can kind of bring about essentially what they call the re-Christianization of Mexico.
Damn.
Right? This restoration of the kingdom of God in Mexico, right? Which is essentially bringing the church and religion to bear more heavily on public life, no? So during the Vicente Fox presidency, right, from 2000 to 2006, there were documented cases of people in specific parts of the government who were either suspected or actually demonstrated to be members of El Yunque.
Really?
Okay? Including, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy, right? Because you can say, well, they were members of El Yunque, or were they just Catholic right-wingers?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, for instance, Fox had a Minister of Interior, which is essentially the second most important political post after the presidency. Minister of Interior, Carlos Abascal, who was the son of a very important right-wing leader, Salvador Abascal, who founded a right-wing Catholic movement in the 1930s called the Unión Nacional Sinarquista. Right? So this Abascal family had this decades-long history of being, Catholic right-wingers. And this guy, Carlos, the guy who became Minister of Interior, it's unclear if he was a member of El Yunque, right? It's not like he was a card-carrying member of El Yunque, and we have like lists of membership lists for El Yunque. But then in other parts of the Fox administration, we do have other examples of men and women who were, again, either suspected or, confirmed that they were part of the organization.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our extended interview with Dr. Luis Herrán Ávila about the upcoming Mexican presidential election and right-wing movements in Mexican politics. Part 2 of this interview will be available in 2 weeks, and as always, premium subscribers will get the episode a few days early and ad-free. To become a member, simply visit talesfromastlantis.com and click Go Premium. And as always, dear listener, remember, the truth is like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it is always good for you. Timoitase. Thank you for listening to Tales from Astlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromastlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.